So this is one of those videos that's incredibly difficult for me to figure out how to do, because The Three-Body Problem is a book that I will happily admit is smarter than I am. I did not understand everything that happened in it, and therefore I don't feel qualified to have any sort of review or deep dive or discussion on this book, yet I feel the need to talk about it more. So I'm not going to call this a review, I'm just going to call it spoilers. And maybe we could talk a little bit. I already did a spoiler-free vlog where I talked about just what I was reading that week. I'll link it in the description if you haven't watched it yet. In that video, I gave some spoiler-free thoughts on The Three-Body Problem as I was reading it and did my best to summarize my feelings and my experience with it. But there are certain elements of this book that I would like to dig into a little bit more. Again, I'm not calling it a review because I'm not touching on every piece of this book. I'm not qualified, I think, to really talk about it. I just feel the need to discuss it more because this is a book that demands to be discussed. So check out the vlog if you want some of my general thoughts, because in this video I'm just going to dive into talking about it a little bit more. So as I said in the vlog, from the first chapter I was enamored with this book because it opens up with a very brutal scene showcasing the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And so as I said in the vlog, I read the first chapter and then thought, okay, let me go brush up on my history, on the information that I need to know on the Cultural Revolution, just so I can have a baseline to be able to have this discussion that the book is clearly trying to at least discuss somewhat. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole. I ended up brushing up a bit more than I intended on the revolution because it's just a devastating time in history and it's easy to get lost in reading up on it. And then I ended up in a nonfiction, which I'm still currently reading, called Wild Swans, following 3 generations of women who survived the revolution and in fact were players in the revolution coming into China and in watching Mao come into power. So in those initial chapters in the book, I was enamored because the setting is so tragic, and the book did a really good job, I think, of capturing that tragedy, of showcasing the tension that happened in that time, the fear, and the how easily friends and family could turn on each other for fear of their own preservation, because really no one was safe. Other than just the fact that this plot was fascinating, I think one of the major things that really captured my attention with this book was in the parallels of this setting. And I think some in small ways as well as in big ways. So a couple of small ways. I think one thing that I mentioned in the vlog, because it was notable to me, but after finishing the book and reading comments and chatting with some friends of mine who have also read the book, I didn't realize that it was such a big stumbling block for people, and that is in the character work. I mentioned in the reading vlog that the characterization isn't something that the author put a grand amount of attention into. It wasn't what his focus was. And I want to unpack that a little bit more because it didn't bother me as much as it seems to have bothered a lot of other readers. So what I meant by that when I said it was that there's not a lot of internal reflection that the author provides for us in these characters. What I mean by that is we have a character, Wang, who is married, and I believe, he's married and he has a child, and his wife and his child are in a scene of the book, but otherwise they're rarely mentioned, and you can easily forget that he has any sort of social ties whatsoever. Major events will happen in the story and the characters will just kind of push on and not really reflect. And the lack of internal reflection was what I was noting, that there's not a lot of processing what's happening to them and how they feel about it. But I actually think that I could be completely wrong. I don't know anything. But I think that there's a potential that this was all intentional. I'm not a historian, nor am I the most knowledgeable person in the room about the revolution. But one thing that I have learned, a few things that I have learned, is that detachment was something that was essentially required in the revolution. So for instance, if a family member was seized, tortured, killed right in front of you, you were watched. So if there was a public execution, you had the executioner, and then you had people who were watching the crowds. And the crowd was required not to show emotion, not to flinch, not to cry. If you showed emotion, if you showed displeasure that your family member or your neighbor or your friend was being killed, then you too could be killed, and most likely will be. This was actually also a factor before the revolution under the governance of the group before Mao came into power. So for instance, it was notable to me that Yi didn't have internal reflection. It was notable to me that we never really, we did, and she was clearly upset and horrified by the whole situation, but there wasn't a lot of reflection on that. There wasn't a lot of page time given to her internal reflection, but as far as externals, she can't have done much. Another sentiment under the communist regime was that it had to be communism over family. And so parents and spouses were expected to always put communism above family. No special treatment for your family, not too much time at home, not too much care for your children. These things were considered to be rightist attitudes and showed that you weren't loyal enough to the communist regime. And in this time, people were being reported, like there was a reporting criteria where those who were expected to be doing the reporting had to manufacture, like, okay, that person seems rightist because of this like thing that they said that one time, and okay, I'm going to report them. And it was such a devastating time in turning on one another and in the level of loyalty that they had to show. So Wang not really talking about his family, not really checking in with his family and being very devoted to what he was doing, to me was a reflection of this revolution that was happening during the story. Again, I'm not a pro at all this. I'm probably not the most knowledgeable person in the room, but this is in Wild Swans. This is something that's talked about quite a lot because the author of the book, her mother and father, were required to be out working for the regime at the time, and like if her mom paid her children too much attention, then she might be reported. So while the fact that characterization didn't seem to be a huge priority to the author, while that was true and that was notable to me, it also seemed to me to be a reflection of the time that the story was written in, where it was very strict and there were certain things that were required of the people. Now, along with that, the revolution that they were living under informed people's thoughts and worldviews. There's obvious examples like that. Obvious examples of that, like with Yi, but then there's also examples in the latter half of the novel where we're doing a lot of philosophizing and talking about, okay, is humanity even worth saving? A lot of that, I think, stems from the world that they were currently in. In this time period, it was the second greatest famine in the world that we know of. People were working and then just laying down and dying of starvation. There were all these false promises of surplus and all these false promises of crops and how people were going to be fed and they were all going to be taken care of, and what this ideal was going to bring for the people, but instead they were worked and starved to death. So it's important to keep that context in mind when we look at the world views that these characters had, the characters that were like, humanity's not worth saving. Look at us. Look at humanity. We should be wiped out. Certain characters that had that perspective, or people who said, we need to bring the aliens in here and let them revolutionize us, because right now the revolution that's happening where humans are revolutionizing humans, like it can't get worse than this. There's certain ideals that were presented, this idea of, yeah, they might not be the greatest solution, but they've got to be better than what we've got now. I think the context that these characters were living through is significant to understand how they could have come to these conclusions. I also really love the scene where Yi confronted the people that executed her father, and she wanted closure, and their response was essentially like, you don't know what we've been through. Like, essentially it was It was a reflection on the fact that the revolution was affecting everyone, that this state of scarcity, this state of hardship, this state of fear, and of people getting turned in left and right was affecting, it was fracturing people, but it was also this cyclical thing where one person is just trying to survive, which causes the demise of the next person because it was such a devastating time. And then you have the Trisolarians, which I may be reading too far into it at this point, but even they seem to be a parallel to the revolution in their chaotic and stable states that their planet was in. You know, they had the three-body problem, these three stars, these three suns that they were just stuck in this chaotic orbit of, which meant that they had these chaotic periods where they would go into this dehydrated state, and then they had their stable times that were few and far between and short-lived. So the aliens are trying to solve this problem, the three-body problem, to be able to predict their orbit. And the game is a reflection of what they're going through. It's a reflection of this three-body problem. And they eventually come to the conclusion that there is no solving this problem. It is unsolvable, and their planet is doomed. And they have to leave. They have to start over. And then they find Earth because Ye's sending out these signals. Ye, you were told not to do this. You were told to stop. But I also feel like, you know, you could say that there are parallels there as well. This chaotic era of the revolution, and they continued to implement new solutions to try to make this a more stable era, a less chaotic era, in that they were saying you have to do self-reports. You have to, you know, every certain period of time, I think it was monthly, you have to do these self-reports so that you can keep yourself accountable, and you have to report others. And we have these strict regulations of how much water you can have and how much food you can have, and how long you're allowed to recover after childbirth. And also now we're also going to ban contraceptives, and like so many rules, no favoritism, no nepotism, none, like these very, very, very strict rules that just kind of kept coming, even no public criticism of the regime. You can talk to your superiors and tell them if you think that there's something wrong, but there will be no public criticism because we have to be in solidarity. We have to have this comment, like we all agree that we're headed towards progress. Anyway, so they kept implementing more things. They kept trying to solve the problem of why this was such a chaotic time to try to make it more stable. I might be reaching, but to me that seemed like a parallel as well. And then the conclusion was there is no solving this problem. This is doomed. This was a mistake. We can't save this. Even the fact that there was a religious element to all of this, with the way people reacting to the Trisolarians, that some people were worshiping them, some people were praying for them, and there was certainly a religious fervor towards Mao. But as I said, the suffering that the characters went through, the time that they were in, informed the way they viewed the world and the way they reacted to this first contact situation. And some of them asked the questions, are humans even worth saving? Should humans be the ones in charge of any sort of revolution? Should we let the aliens have a turn? Should we just wipe out humans and just forget about it? Consider it all a lost cause? And naturally, the revolution is something that, you know, open criticism of is absolutely acceptable. In China, it's commonly accepted that the Cultural Revolution was a horror, it was a devastation, it was a grand mistake. So Liu criticizing it in the three-body problem, you know, this is fine. It is generally accepted in China that this time in history was a mistake. However, as we continue to move forward with these theological questions about humanity and about there is a revolution in the hands of another, would that be better? And so many questions that are potentially going to need to be answered in this trilogy. I am curious to see where it goes. I am curious to see. I would be surprised if I land in the same conclusion as Liu. I don't know if the conclusion that Liu landed at was one that was influenced by the CCP or by, the government, or if it would be unfair, I think, of me to speculate on that at all. But because of a large number of circumstances, I will be surprised if I reach the same conclusion that Liu does in his trilogy. But it's still a really interesting question to ask and discuss. So I'm interested to see where this story takes us in the theological and the, in the thought experiment sense, as well as just in the plot. I mean, this plot is fascinating, which I mentioned in the vlog that I really love the tension of this story, even though so much of this book is just different scenarios of characters sitting in rooms talking. Even with that, there's so much tension because of what's happening while this is going on. Things like when we first learned that the scientists that have studied what Wang is about to start studying, the scientists that have looked into it before him, so many of them have taken their lives. That, what do you mean? What is it? That makes me want to know more what's going to happen. And then when he starts taking those pictures and he sees the countdown, but when his wife and his son take the pictures, there's no countdown. It's only for him, the flash in the universe. And the eye, oh my goodness, the eye. And there was this one quote that was absolutely haunting, chilling, disturbing. For you, dehydration followed by burning is not even remotely adequate as punishment. You're old, and you will not live to see the final destruction of Earth civilization. But I will at least make sure that you know that you cannot save her. I want to let you live until the day she loses all hope. All right, you may leave. There were sections of this novel that were chilling, disturbing, terrifying. Did I understand all the science in it? No. Sorry. There are smarter people than me on the internet that break all that down. That's not gonna be me. But I loved all that this was building to. This very much felt like a prologue book. This very much felt like a ground laying and building tension, and now we're gonna sprint in book 2. I could be wrong, but I have heard book 2 is better, and I loved book 1, so I can't wait to see where book 2 runs to, because I really do. I mean, this is such an unpredictable story so far. Where's it going to take me? I have no idea. Anyway, I have to leave right now. I'm 1 minute late to leaving, so I have to go, but I did want to just sit here and kind of spout some thoughts at you. Again, this isn't really much of a review. It's more of just me kind of talking through some of the things that really struck me about the book, but there's even more that we could discuss. So please feel free to chat with me more in the comments, things that worked for you, things that didn't work for you, what stood out to you in this novel, what did affect you in it. Did you even like it? Because I know a lot of people don't, but obviously a load of people do as well. So, let's chat about it. People who are smarter than me, I'm sure, can have a much better discussion on this than I can. But anyway, I post videos every Tuesday and Thursday on this channel, Mondays and Fridays on my other channel. I'll see you again soon. Bye.